Episode 16 of the Long Haul Podcast. I'm Nine. As always, with me is my co-host, Carrie Man. What have you been up to, dude?
Hey. What's up? What I've been up to? Well, I've took the dust off of one of my oldest played games. I've been playing Diablo 3 for a bit. And other than that, I drafted like twice on Artifact this week.
Sweet. What's up with Diablo? Did they have any updates?
No, it's still dead. But I got like a posse that we normally get together and play, and they were like, "Hey, let's play this," and I'm like, "Why?" And they're like, "Well, it's fun. Let's go. let's for old time's sake." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, why not?"
You're preparing for Diablo Immortal.
I will not play that on my phone, even if you pay me.
All right. So let's focus on the community. Not a lot of official news, as everyone knows, we're still on the long haul, But, however, the DCL, the Draft Constructed League, has begun. And this weekend, we had the first weekly Sunday events. And as we record this on Monday, there's been a few of the regular daily events as well. The Sunday events were relatively good, so there were about 40 players, I think, in the constructed one, and unfortunately, I don't have the number for the draft one, but I think there were more in the draft one. So, from what I gathered, it seemed like the hosts, the organizers, were surprised that they got, or rather, they got more people than they thought they would get. So that seems to be a good start for the DCL.
Well, yeah, you gotta admit, 40 people for first tournament of a new league. That's pretty sweet. I'm really happy that we actually got a lot of people back in the game playing tournaments.
Yeah, and some repeat winners. Some changes in the meta, but we'll go through those things. I wanted to say also that it was awesome for me because I got to cast both events with Aquin. I casted the draft episode. Constructed for me is a bit more shaky, but Bok fired up the stream and I casted with him. And it was actually a lot of fun, so looking forward to maybe do that again in the future. Although it would have been cool to play as well, because obviously if you're casting, you can't really play. But yeah, overall it was a decent Artifact weekend for me. Had a bunch of fun. What I would like to say is that I decided to go through some of these last tournaments. If you guys follow Reddit, you've seen that I posted one or two things over there on Meta. But I thought since the DCL is firing up and everyone's kind of excited that we can play again, and that we might have, another final tournament at the end of the month and some decent prize pool again, I thought it would be cool to gather some stats and kind of look at the meta, see how the meta is evolving. Obviously, everyone knows this is just a one-set standard format, but surprisingly dynamic from what we see.
What do you mean? Care to explain to the people who did not get to play the tournament?
Yeah, sure. So before the DCL started, we had the weekly Monday events. Those were the biggest constructed events that were organized, and Mono Red and Mono Blue had been dominating those events, taking up about half of the slots of those events. So basically, like a quarter of the players would be on Mono Red, a quarter would be on Mono Blue, and then the rest of the field would be spread out. And this first event. And I'll post a link to the Reddit post on the show notes. But this first event seems to show a shift towards red-black. Red-black being a very what's the word? The red-black archetype contains a lot of different decks. Is basically what I'm trying to say. We have the old style 4 red, 1 black, the Mago build, so like the woke red type thing. There's a bunch of Sorla, very aggro decks with a very low curve as well, and kind of the most recent forms of the deck also in red black, with quite a bit of one-ofs and more kind of a mid-rangey deck with more late game in Spring the Trap and Time of Triumph, obviously.
So pretty much we're seeing a little bit of aggro coming back, which we weren't seeing in the latest meta before the game got into a shaky place. And there's a lot of variety instead of just the cookie cutter builds, right?
So I think what everyone seemed to be saying was that mono blue was a very dominant deck, and people seem to agree that if the pilot of the deck was good, mono blue was the best deck. And it seems like the field shifted towards mono red, even though some of these mono blue players, as we had Mez, for example, here during our interview with him, say that he believes mono blue has a good matchup towards mono red. But I think most of the people decided to use mono red as a tool to fight against mono blue, and potentially as the presence of mono blue got reduced slightly. And red black, or at least some of the forms of red black having a decent matchup against mono blue as well. I think the meta became a bit more diverse as people tried to combat mono red and still not lose too many points towards mono blue.
Yeah, well, I guess it's the typical mentality that everyone was expecting mono blue to be dominant, which awkwardly it wasn't. And to be honest, I do feel that red with a little splash of black is way stronger against blue than mono red.
Yeah, black provides you with more mobility and more targeted kill, so targeted damage and so, as well as kind of better priority cards. But so what I wanted to say is, for this first week of June, the DCL meta has been composed of about 14% mono red, 9% mono blue, and red black was the dominating archetype with 23%. Of course, if I would break down the different decks of red black, the percentages would be smaller, but this would be a lot of work going through all the deck lists, and it's just very time consuming to do this as it is.
Boys, he did the math.
There were a bunch of red-green decks, 15% as well, but I have the impression, due to the timing of the event and being the first week, that a lot of draft players just decided to grab some random deck and play, and I guess a lot of them went towards red-green and blue-green, because blue-green was 12% and red-green was 15%, which was a bit surprising to me. And otherwise, Mez decided to play mono-green, which is also a surprise.
How did that go?
It didn't go very well. I think he lost the second round, but it's great to see that he's trying new stuff. I mean, he had told us that he likes to try new stuff and that he's been hoping to grab mono green eventually. So he decided to do it this time. It didn't go very well. The other interesting thing is that I compiled a bunch of data from all the rounds that were played. This comprises the weekly Mondays events as well as this first week of June, and I hope to include more events as time goes forwards, depending on how much free time I have to dedicate to this. But basically, we've got a relatively small sample size, but I think large enough that it's worth talking about some of these numbers. Mono red has been quite a big share of the meta lately, as most people agree that it's a tier 1 deck. So it's quite interesting to look at the different matchups that the deck has and the overall percentages from these tournaments. Mono red seems to have, in my data, about 56% win rate, which is not a lot, but obviously it's positive and not a bad number. I think if this were to be like a Magic deck, for example, I think 56% win rate would be relatively decent, like not broken, but decent. And obviously, this is a lot. This varies a lot according to the pilot of the deck, because this data comprises everyone that played mono red. So if you would just take the best players, I'm sure this overall win rate could go up a little bit.
Oh yeah, but if you look at the strongest archetypes, you got like 6. It's placed third when it comes to overall win rate. So it's not a big number, 56 per se, and it strongly depends on the player or the pilot, like you want to call it. But I do feel that 56% is a little bit low for the deck, but like you said, it depends on the pilot.
Yeah, and some of the other decks might have a higher win percentage because of small sample size as well. But I think also what is interesting to dissect here is the mono blue matchup, which people talk a lot about. In 8 recorded games of red versus blue, red has in this data a 63% win rate. Again, this is a small sample size. Numbers will change over time, but it seems to be positive from what we see here. In fact, I would say that most of the numbers that red presents are relatively positive. The one striking number here is that in 10 matches of red versus red black won 6 times. So basically, red has a 30% win rate against red black, which is abysmal. It's really bad, and that probably reflects why people have shifted towards red black, trying to feed on these mono red players in these events.
Yeah, I do feel that like I said before, the red deck with a little splash of black for me is like ideal, to be honest.
Yeah, once again, it's really difficult to specify here because there were decks with Lich, decks with Tinker, decks with PA, decks with Sarla, decks with Bounty Hunter and stuff. So it's difficult to generalize. It would be great to have more information about the more specific red-black builds and their win rates, but I think that's just impossible to assess at the moment as it is.
You casted the games. Do you feel from all the games that you casted and watched, do you feel that the aggro variant had a little comeback? Do you still feel from what you've seen that it's still not, the meta is not favorable for it?
My overall feeling is, and I'm obviously not primarily a constructed player, but I'm working on it. My overall feeling is that the very aggro red-black deck has a great matchup against the field. It's weaker in the mirror match, so it seems to be weaker when you play against other versions of red-black. But it definitely feeds on control decks. It feeds on 2-color decks. And it's otherwise difficult to say, and my experience is also limited. But I think it's a good choice. So the aggro version made the finals and lost, and placed second. There was TGG, a new player to the scene, I believe, piloting the Sarla Tinker deck with a curve maxing out at 6 with PA and X, no cards over 6 mana. And he lost to Week Winner, which is a repeat winner of these events. Or let's put it like this: he's won weekly Mondays before. He's the first ever DCL champion, so congratulations to him. And he was playing more of a mid-rangey deck. These games are otherwise not very easy to pilot, and especially for the more aggro deck, they're kind of more draw and flop dependent. So I guess he needed to be a bit luckier to get off to a good start. But from what I saw, it felt like the more mid-rangey deck with Time of Triumph and Spring the Trap had a bit of an edge in that game and ended up winning.
Yeah, well, mid-range is I do like it. I feel that at the moment when you play too much control-like decks, it doesn't. Unless you're playing blue, I don't think it will work. And if you play too much aggro, that's why I kind of asked you, because I feel aggro doesn't have a place in the meta. But since there's not that many people playing at the moment, I don't know if people are not used to play against aggro at the moment, and when they play in tournaments against aggro, they get caught by surprise. I don't know. So I think for now, it's been mid-range all the way, and it seems that mid-range is still kicking ass.
Yeah. So I think moving on, so this 56% win rate, overall win rate against all the decks of Mono Red was based on a 40 game sample size. I wanted to just mention that Mono Blue with the 25 game sample size had a very dismal 29% win rate, doing very poorly in the meta at the moment. Again, it could be that might be related to Mez and other top blue players not being on the deck, but who knows? It will be interesting to follow how these things shift over time. Another deck that's been relatively popular beside these top 3 decks, red, blue, and red, black, was mono black. Mono black was decently represented. 21 matches I recorded, 43% win rate. The matchup against blue seems to be decent, with a 67% win rate. But the mono red matchup seems to be pretty bad, 25 win rate. So one of the strong points, it seems, for this deck is fighting mono blue, because mono blue has a hard time fighting those big items and also denying your economy cards. It seems to be like as everyone would guess, tier 2 or tier 3 choice.
Would you say that the win rate against mono blue is every time I think of mono black, I think about money generation, about gold generation, and since they can easily kill blue heroes and eventually steamroll or make the snowball effect, the win ration would be as big as we can see with the 67. And since red heroes are a little bit tougher and harder to kill because of armor, probably that's where they found the biggest difficulty. In your opinion, is it something like that, or did you see something else?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the impression that I get is, until turn 6, mono blue is quite weak. If mono black manages to get some kills, the economy cards are uncounterable and blue cannot do much about the items. So if mono black gets an early economy advantage and drops those vestures and those horns of the alpha before the annihilations and the big eclipses start falling, the deck seems to do well, and I think that explains why the win rate is decent. And obviously against mono red, black heroes in general are quite squishy, so it's a problem that the deck probably struggles to get some traction initially. You want to get those track kills, you want to get those paydays off, but if your heroes are trading or dying and not killing, it's difficult to get off to a good start, and then often it's just too difficult to come back. Another very interesting statistic is that mono green in our data has an 80% win rate, but that's just based off of 5 games. So I'm pretty sure that figure is not correct. Hope to get better information on that deck in the future. And the other main deck that I analyzed was blue black, which we managed to look at 17 of its games. Overall, it had not a great win rate at 41%, excuse me. But what is interesting about blue black is that it seems to have a positive matchup against red black. So with red black on the rise and blue black showing an overall 60% win rate against red black, blue black might be a good choice going into next week. I think since there's not much more in terms of news or community things, we might focus ourselves a bit more in statistics in the coming weeks, depending on how things go, and also on the interest of the community on these informations that we gather. But we might try to make the casts slightly shorter and more informative. And unless, if something outstanding happens or if we plan for more interviews, we will obviously take the time to do those. But I think in general, it might be a good idea to try to keep these short in the future and more kind of stats related.
Yeah, talk about the meta, see how the tournaments work during the week. If something new pops up, we'll obviously cover it and talk about it, even if it's just, Luna Moon days.
Yeah, exactly. What I wanted to say also is, guys, if you want to play, if you enjoy playing, and if you can afford it, it would be great to get people to support the DCL over on Patreon. There's links to their Patreon and to their Discord in previous episodes as well. Otherwise, as always, you can find us on all the classical platforms. Would like to mention that I also added this to SoundCloud, so if that's your preferred platform, you can find us there as well. And otherwise, I think that's it for this week.
Well, It was sweet and short.
A lot of people like that.
I don't even know how to answer that, I guess.
It was bait. All right. See you guys next week.
You guys, see you next week.